The manila envelope hit Attorney Harrison's polished mahogany desk with a thud. I could feel my daughter Elaine's eyes on me, sharp and impatient, as she leaned forward in her tailored suit, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "Mother has completely lost her mind," she said, not bothering to lower her voice despite my presence beside her. "She can't manage her affairs anymore. The house is falling apart, she left the stove on twice last week, and frankly, she's becoming a burden we simply can't shoulder alone." I kept my expression carefully blank, my hands folded calmly over my worn leather purse. The same one I'd carried when I worked as head nurse at Mercy General for 30 years. Inside that purse was a small digital recorder, silently capturing every word of this meeting. "Mrs. Eleanor Sullivan has exhibited significant cognitive decline," continued Elaine, sliding over what appeared to be medical documentation with confident authority. "As her only child, I'm requesting power of attorney immediately. It's for her own safety." Attorney Harrison adjusted his glasses, glancing at me with concern in his eyes. "Mrs. Sullivan, what do you think about this?" I blinked several times, forcing confusion into my eyes. "I'm sorry, are we at the doctor's office? I need to pick up my prescription for my arthritis. The Plaquenil costs $273 a month now, you know." Elaine sighed dramatically. "See what I mean? It's been like this for months." What my daughter didn't know was that I remembered everything with perfect clarity. Every dismissive comment, every misplaced document, every hushed phone call with our husband about mother's money. What she also didn't know was what I had hidden in my will after 4 decades of supporting her through every crisis of her life. Before I reveal how I turned her dismissal into her downfall, subscribe to her silver truth for daily stories where elderly wisdom proves more powerful than anyone expected. These aren't just stories, they're validation that our generation's patience, attention to detail, and lifetime of experience are powerful weapons when others underestimate us. How does a woman who spent decades sacrificing everything for her family end up being called a burden to her face? The journey from devoted mother to strategic mastermind began with 3 simple words that changed everything. As I sat in that attorney's office with my perfectly crafted facade of confusion, no one suspected the meticulous 18-month plan already in motion, and the carefully hidden provision in my will, prepared through months of secret documentation, would soon make my daughter realize the true cost of betrayal after decades of unconditional support. At 78, I still rose every morning at 5:45 a.m., just as I had during my nursing career from 1967 to 1997. The routine rarely varied, stretching carefully to ease the stiffness in my hands before my feet touched the bedroom's hardwood floor, laid by Robert himself in 1972. He'd spent 3 weekends on his knees measuring and hammering while I brought him iced tea in the same glass tumbler he'd had since college. My morning pill organizer contained 7 different medications, each representing a different battle my body fought. Blood pressure, thyroid, cholesterol, arthritis. The Plaquenil was newest and most expensive, not fully covered by Medicare. I arranged them carefully each Sunday evening, a rainbow of capsules and tablets that marked the passage of time as surely as any calendar. I lived on $1,120 in monthly Social Security and $850 from Robert's pension. After property taxes on our modest colonial in Millbrook, $436 monthly, and medications, $473. The remainder went to utilities, groceries, and the occasional splurge on my garden. I kept meticulous financial records in leather-bound ledgers, a habit from watching my parents struggle through the Depression. Those ledgers, stored in Robert's old Navy footlocker, would later prove invaluable. Our home at 247 Sycamore Lane wasn't grand, but represented a lifetime of memories. Robert and I watched Neil Armstrong step onto the moon on our Zenith television in the living room, holding hands in silent awe as history unfolded. We weathered the 18% interest rates of the early 1980s by cutting back on everything except Elaine's college fund. When Robert passed in 2008, I maintained the house myself, learning to change furnace filters, and unclogged drains from library books with yellowing pages. The garden became my sanctuary, particularly the bench Robert built for our 30th anniversary. Each spring I still planted his favourite Blue Angels petunias, a nod to his 1958 to 1962 Navy service aboard the USS Intrepid. My neighbours, Margaret across the street, 82, and the Jenkins couple next door, late 70s, often joined me for coffee on the wraparound porch, comparing notes on our grandchildren and joint pain that worsened with approaching rain. Elaine had been our only child, born after 3 heartbreaking miscarriages. I could still feel the weight of her in my arms that first day in April 1972. Despite Robert's modest salary as a mechanical engineer at Hamilton Standard and my nursing income, we provided Elaine with dance lessons, summer camps, SAT prep courses, and, ultimately, 4 years at Cornell University where she studied business. We re-mortgaged our home to help her through divorce from her first husband in 1999, then again to help with the down payment on her current home in Westchester County. When her daughter Zoe needed orthodontics, we contributed $4,800. When her son Tyler wanted computer programming courses, we found $3,500. Through it all, I kept every receipt, every thank you note, increasingly rare, and every bank statement. Not out of suspicion, but from a generation that documented important matters. Those records now filled 3 boxes in my attic, organized by decade. A paper trail of love and sacrifice spanning 40 years. The first sign came during Thanksgiving 2020. Elaine arrived with her husband Marcus and their now adult children. While helping in the kitchen, she noticed my handwritten recipe cards in their wooden box, organized by category just as my mother had taught me. "Mum, nobody uses these anymore. There are apps for this," she said, holding up my splattered card for Robert's favourite pumpkin pie, the corners soft from decades of handling. "This system is so outdated." "I like my cards," I said simply. "Your father could find his favourites without asking." "Well, he's been gone 12 years, she replied, tapping on her iPhone. "I'm taking pictures of these, so when something happens to you, we'll have digital copies." When something happens to you. Not if. A month later, Elaine insisted on joining me for my annual physical. Dr. Peterson had been my physician for 20 years and raised an eyebrow at her presence. "Mum's been forgetting things," Elaine announced before I could speak. "Last week she called me thinking it was Sunday when it was Tuesday." "I had a migraine and lost track after taking Excedrin," I explained, feeling my face flush with embarrassment. "And she's keeping food long past expiration dates," she continued. "Her refrigerator is a health hazard." "The power was out for 6 hours last month. I replaced everything," I said. Dr. Peterson nodded, making notes. "Any fools, Eleanor?" "Not one," I answered proudly. "She wouldn't tell us if there were," interjected Elaine. "She's becoming stubborn about accepting help." That night, I found her in my home office, looking through my financial statements laid out neatly on Robert's old desk. "Just helping organize," she said quickly. "Mum, have you considered what a burden this big house is becoming? The stairs, the maintenance." "It's not a burden to me," I replied, carefully taking the statements from her hands. By spring 2021, Elaine had started showing up unannounced, often rearranging my kitchen or medications schedule. She scheduled a routine visit with an elder care specialist who asked pointed questions about my ability to live independently. When I mentioned this to Margaret during our coffee clatch, she leaned forward with concern in her eyes. "Eleanor, Karen Miller's daughter did the same thing last year. 3 months later, Karen was in assisted living and her house was on the market." But what I didn't realise then was why she had been checking my medication schedule so carefully, or why she had started taking photos of every room in my house. That evening, as I sat on the stairs intending to ask Elaine about dinner plans, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. The truth I was about to discover would turn my world upside down and force me to question everything about our relationship. After 40 years of unconditional support, was I now just a financial calculation to my only child? What happened next revealed how long this betrayal had been planned and how much my daughter stood to gain from my supposed decline. The conversation I overheard that evening made me question everything I thought I knew about the child I'd raised. As I sat frozen on the stairs, straining to hear every word, I realized I was facing a battle I never expected to fight in my twilight years. A battle for my dignity, my independence, and the home that held 4 decades of memories. That evening, I sat frozen on the stairs, listening to Elaine on the phone with her husband. Mum's house has to be worth at least $380,000 now. Once we get power of attorney, we can start making decisions about care facilities. More affordable options might make sense given her limited savings. I gripped the banister, Robert's careful craftsmanship solid under my fingers. What limited savings was she referring to? My finances were modest but carefully managed, something she would know if she'd asked instead of snooping. The dismissals became more frequent, more public. At Tyler's graduation dinner, she corrected me mid-sentence when I mentioned the date of his first science fair project. Mum's memory isn't what it used to be, she told everyone at the table. She gets confused about dates. The pity in my grandson's eyes stung worse than any arthritis pain. When Dr. Peterson asked about my health during a checkup, Elaine answered for me. She wouldn't tell us if there were problems, she said. She's becoming stubborn about accepting help. I can speak for myself, I said, my nurse's training still evident in my tone. See what I mean? Elaine replied with an exaggerated sigh. So defensive lately. During family gatherings, I noticed my place had been moved from the head of the table, where I'd sat for 40 years, to a side position where I could be helped more easily. My opinions about holiday plans were solicited, then ignored. When I mentioned traveling to see my sister in Arizona, Elaine exchanged glances with Marcus. We'll discuss that later, Mom, she said, as if speaking to a child. The final insult came when she answered my phone and told my oldest friend Louise that I was too confused for a planned lunch date. I only discovered this when Louise called back on my neighbour's phone, concerned that I might be seriously ill. I noticed my bank statements no longer arrived in the mail. I've set up online banking for you, Elaine explained. It's easier for me to help manage your accounts this way. Help manage, not help me manage. She began helping me pay bills, insisting on seeing each invoice. When I mentioned a $200 donation to my church's food pantry, she frowned. Mum, we need to be careful with your limited income. Let me review your charitable giving. My charitable giving had been the same for 15 years, 10% of my income, just as my parents had taught me. This wasn't carelessness, it was a value. But suddenly, it required her approval. When my property tax bill arrived, she quickly took it. I'll handle this for you, she said. Later, I discovered she had called the assessor's office, inquiring about what happens to property when owners enter assisted living. My medication management became her new project. I'm organising your pills for the week, she announced, though I'd been using my system for years without issue. Later, I found she'd been counting them, checking if I was taking them as prescribed, or perhaps forgetting. The most alarming development came when I discovered she'd contacted my insurance company about long-term care options. Just researching, she claimed when confronted. We need to be prepared. She began intercepting calls from my friends, telling Margaret and the Jenkins that I was having a bad day when they asked to speak with me. My social circle shrank as she controlled who could reach me and when. Even my mail was redirected to her address for safekeeping. Important documents, insurance policies, bank notices, even personal letters, passed through her hands before reaching mine, if they ever did. When I questioned this arrangement, she reminded me of 2 bills I'd supposedly forgotten to pay, though I had no recollection of seeing them. For my birthday, Elaine replaced my treasured photo albums with a digital frame. These old albums were collecting dust, she explained. The carefully written captions I'd created, dates, names, stories behind each image were gone, replaced by sterile images with no context. The physical connection to those memories the feel of the page, the handwriting of friends who had passed, vanished with a technological upgrade I never requested. When the grandchildren visited, she corrected my stories about Robert. "That's not how it happened, Mom," she'd say, though she hadn't even been born when Robert and I met. Gradually, our family history was being rewritten without my input, 40 years of shared experiences dismissed as faulty recollections. During a family dinner, Tyler asked about my nursing career. Before I could answer, Elaine jumped in. Healthcare was so different back then. Nothing like today's medical technology. My 3 decades of saving lives reduced to an antiquated footnote. The night I talked a young mother through an unexpected delivery during a blizzard, the patients I'd comforted through terminal diagnoses, the innovations I'd helped implement in our emergency department, all erased. My gardening tools disappeared from the shed. "It's too dangerous for you to be out there alone," Elaine said. The Blue Angel's petunias I'd planted every spring since Robert's passing remained in their store containers, withering. My connection to him and to the earth that had sustained me through grief was deemed a safety hazard. Even my clothing choices became subject to her approval. "That outfit is too complicated with your arthritis," she'd say, selecting simpler options that I neither liked nor felt represented me. The emerald blouse Robert had always loved was deemed too fussy, with its row of small buttons. Most painfully, she began referring to my possessions as if they were already hers. "When we repaint the house," or "we might replace that sofa." My home, filled with 40 years of memories, was being mentally redecorated before I'd even left it. Each remark was another nail in the coffin of my independence, another erasure of Eleanor Sullivan. Many of us have heard these dismissive words when trying to express concerns. Being talked over, corrected, managed as if our decades of independent living suddenly counted for nothing. They call it helping, but what they're really doing is dismantling our autonomy piece by piece. But what they fail to understand about our generation is that we've weathered far worse than their condescension. We survived economic hardships they've never known, built careers when the odds were stacked against us, and managed households under constraints they can't imagine. We learned to stretch dollars during recessions, to repair rather than replace, to find solutions with limited resources. While they see only our physical limitations, they miss the mental fortitude that carried us through challenges they've been spared. That's exactly why I decided to start documenting everything they said and did. Our experience has taught us patience and perspective they can't imagine. We know that careful observation reveals patterns, that detailed records speak louder than protests, and that timing is everything. Most importantly, we know that the battle for dignity isn't won through confrontation alone, but through strategic planning and irrefutable evidence. What Elaine didn't know was that I had already spoken to someone who would later become my unexpected ally, someone from my past who understood exactly what was happening and had seen this pattern before. But I needed proof before I could act. Without concrete evidence, it would be my word against hers, and she was already creating a paper trail of my supposed incompetence. I needed to document every conversation, every misplaced document, every unauthorized access to my accounts. But how could I gather this evidence while appearing increasingly forgetful? If you've ever had your concerns dismissed because of your age, tap the like button now. It's our way of standing together against those who underestimate us. Have you noticed family members speaking about you rather than to you, or making decisions without consulting you? Share your experience in the comments below. You're not alone in this struggle, and together we can reclaim the respect we've earned through decades of wisdom and experience. The breaking point came in February when Elaine arrived with brochures for Sunny Pines Assisted Living. The glossy pamphlets showed smiling seniors in carefully staged activities, a far cry from the institutional reality I'd seen during my nursing career. "It's got activities, dining options, and no stairs to worry about," she enthused, spreading the photos across my kitchen table. The same table where I'd helped her with homework for 12 years, where we'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where Robert and I had coffee every morning for 40 years. And the best part, we could sell the house and use that money to keep you comfortable for years. But this is my home, I said, my voice catching as I ran my fingers along the table's familiar scratch from Tyler's science project. Robert and I built our life here. She patted my hand like I was a child. Dad would want you safe. You're becoming a burden to yourself, Mum. Marcus and I can't keep driving over every time you have a confused episode. The word hung in the air between us. Burden. After decades of support, thousands of dollars, countless hours of childcare and emotional guidance, I had become a burden. The same woman who once called me crying at 2 a.m. when her marriage was failing, who had lived in our spare bedroom for 8 months during her divorce, who had never hesitated to ask for financial help, now found my existence burdensome. That night, after she left, I sat at Robert's desk and wept for the first time since beginning my charade. But as I touched the worn wood, something inside me straightened. I could almost hear Robert's voice. "Protect yourself, Ellie. No one else will do it for you." I wiped my tears and pulled out the small digital recorder I'd been using. I played back Elaine's words. "A burden to yourself." My hands stopped shaking. My breathing steadied. In that moment, I wasn't just Eleanor Sullivan, worried mother. I was Eleanor Sullivan, RN, who had managed emergency room crises for 30 years. The woman who had talked down violent patients, who had made split-second decisions that saved lives, who had trained dozens of younger nurses to stay calm under pressure. The next morning, I made 2 decisions that would change everything. First, I placed a small digital recorder in my purse, purchased years ago when I was writing my memoir. Second, I called my old nursing colleague Patricia, now a geriatric care specialist. "I need to know exactly how to appear cognitively impaired," I told her, "without risking an actual diagnosis." Patricia's eyes widened. "Eleanor, what's happening?" I played the recordings I'd already collected. Her expression shifted from concern to righteous anger, the same look I'd seen when we discovered a patient being mistreated by family. "This is textbook elder financial exploitation," she said, "and you're handling it like the nurse you've always been, gathering data before acting." For the first time in months, I felt validated. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't overreacting. What was happening had a name, and if it had a name, it could be fought. So many of us have felt that moment when everything suddenly becomes clear, when the fog of doubt lifts and we see the truth of our situation with painful clarity. That moment when we realize we're not imagining things, not being too sensitive, not misunderstanding their intentions. They mistake our patience for weakness, our silence for acceptance, our caution for confusion. They forget that we've spent decades managing families, careers, and crises they can't imagine, navigating workplace discrimination, balancing budgets during recessions, raising children without today's conveniences, caring for aging parents without support systems. I realized my years of careful record-keeping, those meticulous journals and ledgers they mocked as outdated, were about to become my greatest weapon. The habit of documenting important information, of saving relevant paperwork, of maintaining detailed financial records, practices from an era before digital convenience, now provided exactly the evidence I needed. Our generation's attention to detail isn't obsessive, it's protective. Our insistence on paper trails isn't old-fashioned, it's prudent. And our reluctance to share financial information isn't paranoia, it's wisdom born from experience. The very practices they dismiss as antiquated were about to become my shield and sword. The missing piece I needed most was proof of my cognitive capacity, evidence that would stand up against the narrative Elaine had been carefully crafting. Without it, my word alone might not be enough against the story she'd been establishing for months with doctors and family members. I needed professional assessment of my mental state that would directly contradict her claims of my decline. But how could I obtain this evaluation without revealing my plan? And what if the stress of this situation had actually affected my cognitive function in ways I couldn't recognize? Selective memory loss isn't uncommon, Patricia explained over coffee in her kitchen, well away from anyone who knew Elaine. Patients often remember distant past perfectly, but struggle with recent events. They repeat questions, but with consistent details each time. They might get confused about the day, but can recall childhood phone numbers. I took careful notes with my cross pen, a retirement gift from my nursing unit, so I could appear confused about recent conversations while maintaining clear memories of past events. Exactly. But Eleanor, this is a dangerous game. If doctors believe you're declining, they might prescribe unnecessary medications with serious side effects. That afternoon, we visited attorney James Calloway, who had handled Robert's estate and had known us since the 1970s. Unlike many of my friends, I had resisted letting Elaine replace my longtime advisors with her more modern professionals. Financial exploitation of elders is increasingly common, James said gravely after hearing the recordings. Even, perhaps especially, from family members. What can I do? I asked. If I confront her, she'll just get more careful. Document everything, he advised, and consider revising your will and estate plan immediately. That night, I began Operation Memory Loss. I selected 3 specific incidents to forget: a doctor's appointment, a phone call with Elaine, and where I'd placed my gardening shears. I called her repeatedly, asking the same questions about Zoe's college schedule. I left cabinet doors open and pretended to be confused about which medications I'd taken. Simultaneously, I executed the second phase of my plan. I withdrew $45,000, my entire remaining savings, and with James's help, established an irrevocable trust for my great-grandchildren's education. I then created a comprehensive estate plan with 3 key components unknown to Elaine. First, I catalogued every financial contribution Robert and I had made to Elaine over 4 decades, totaling approximately $287,000 in today's dollars. Second, I documented every instance of her dismissive or exploitative behavior, complete with recordings, witness statements from neighbors, and entries from my journals. Finally, I drafted a new will with a shocking provision hidden within legal language Elaine would likely skim. Patricia helped me establish a secret relationship with Dr. Khan, a neurologist who understood elder abuse. During official evaluations, I presented the symptoms we had discussed, just enough to raise concerns, but not enough for an actual diagnosis. In private sessions, he conducted thorough cognitive assessments that documented my true mental state. As my plan unfolded, I watched Elaine grow increasingly confident. She began scheduling unnecessary home repairs with contractors who always seemed to find additional costly problems. She reorganized my financial documents, conveniently misplacing records of her previous loans. She told extended family that my condition was worsening, further isolating me from support. With each dismissive comment or controlling action, I added another entry to my documentation. I maintained the vacant stare, the confused questions, the occasional disorientation, all while meticulously building my case. Like a chess player thinking 5 moves ahead, I prepared for the eventual confrontation while appearing increasingly helpless. What I did next would change our family dynamic forever, exposing 4 decades of truth in a single, carefully orchestrated moment that would leave my daughter speechless. And finally, make her understand the true cost of her betrayal. After months of playing the role of declining mother, I was ready for the final act. The attorney's office I had chosen as my stage wasn't just a legal setting. It was a place where documented facts would triumph over manipulated perceptions. Every detail had been arranged, every participant briefed, every piece of evidence organized for maximum impact. The moment had arrived to reveal that the supposedly confused elderly woman was actually the architect of a flawless counter-strategy. By April, Elaine had convinced my primary care physician to refer me to a neurologist specializing in dementia. I attended these appointments alone, having carefully researched symptoms, to manifest, just enough to raise concerns, but not enough for an actual diagnosis. The neurologist, Dr. Khan, seemed puzzled during our official sessions. "Your long-term memory is remarkably intact, Mrs. Sullivan. You remember details from decades ago with precision. It's only recent events that seem problematic." I nodded vaguely. Some days are clearer than others. Then I'd forget where I'd placed my purse, which was always in the same spot. I'd deliberately placed it upon arrival. In our private sessions, documented but not shared with Elaine, Dr. Khan conducted thorough assessments that demonstrated my actual cognitive abilities. Tests I passed with scores well above average for my age group. Meanwhile, I had Margaret and the Jenkins regularly check my mail, rescuing important documents before Elaine could intercept them. Patricia helped me establish online banking access, known only to me, allowing me to monitor my accounts despite having forgotten how to use computers when Elaine was present. The most difficult moment came when she brought a real estate agent to assess some maintenance issues. I overheard them discussing necessary updates before listing, while I pretended to nap in my bedroom. That night, I added another recording to my growing collection. Working with James Calloway, I requested a meeting with Harrison, his younger partner, allowing Elaine to believe it was about granting her power of attorney. Secretly, I coordinated with James, Dr. Khan, and Patricia to be present. The night before our appointment, I reviewed my evidence one final time. 18 months of recordings, financial documentation spanning 4 decades, medical assessments confirming my competence, and the revised will with its shocking provision. I chose my outfit carefully, the blue suit I'd worn to Robert's funeral, a symbol of strength during grief. Inside my worn leather purse, the small recorder contained everything needed to shatter the false reality Elaine had constructed. After months of playing a role, tomorrow I would finally reclaim my identity and my dignity. There comes a moment when we must decide between keeping peace and demanding respect. After a lifetime of compromise and accommodation, this choice tests everything we believe about family loyalty and harmony. Our generation was taught to avoid conflict, to prioritize relationships over confrontation, to sacrifice our needs for family stability. We were raised on blood is thicker than water, and family above all. These values served us well through many challenges, but they can be weaponized against us when family members exploit our reluctance to create waves. Our generation knows the value of timing, of waiting for the perfect moment rather than rushing to confrontation. We understand that preparation determines outcome, that evidence speaks louder than emotion, that the right setting can mean the difference between being dismissed and being heard. That's why I chose this formal legal setting as the moment to reveal everything, a place where truth would be documented and undeniable, where my daughter's carefully constructed narrative would be systematically dismantled by facts rather than accusations. When you've been silenced and dismissed repeatedly, you must choose a moment and place where your voice cannot be ignored or reinterpreted. Sometimes, justice requires witnesses. In the attorney's office, I maintained my vacant expression as Elaine confidently presented her documentation to Harrison. Her folder contained doctor's notes, a list of my supposed memory lapses, and draft power of attorney documents already filled out. "Mrs. Sullivan," Harrison addressed me formally, "do you understand why we're here today?" I blinked slowly, tilting my head slightly. "Is it about my garden? The Blue Angel's petunias need planting soon. Robert always loved those." Elaine sighed dramatically. "See what we're dealing with? Yesterday she left the stove on. The day before she couldn't find her checkbook, though it was right on her desk. It's not safe anymore." Harrison nodded, then pressed a button on his desk phone. "Could you please join us now?" The door opened and James Calloway entered, followed by Dr. Patricia Williams and Dr. Khan, the neurologist. The surprise on Elaine's face was immediate. Elaine straightened in her chair. "What's this about?" "We're here to discuss power of attorney for my mother's care." "Mrs. Sullivan asked us to be here," James explained. taking a seat beside me. He placed a thick folder on the desk, labelled with my name in his precise handwriting. I reached into my purse and removed my digital recorder, placing it on the desk. Then I sat up straighter, meeting Elaine's eyes directly. The vacant look vanished, replaced by the clear gaze that had commanded respect during my nursing career. "I don't have dementia, Elaine," I said clearly. "I never did." Her face flushed. "Mum, you're confused." "No," Dr. Khan interjected. "She isn't. I've been monitoring Mrs. Sullivan for months. She shows no clinical signs of cognitive impairment. Her memory tests are exceptional for her age." "That's impossible," Elaine protested. "I've witnessed her confusion daily. She forgets conversations, loses things." I pressed play on the recorder. Elaine's voice filled the room. "Once we get power of attorney, we can start making decisions about care facilities. More affordable options might make sense given her limited savings." I stopped the recording. "I have 18 months of similar conversations, Elaine, with Marcus, with your financial advisor, with the real estate agent you brought to assess my home's value." The colour drained from her face. "You were spying on me." "I was protecting myself," I corrected. "After supporting you for 40 years, through college, your divorce, the children's expenses, I became a burden the moment you saw an opportunity to take my home." What Elaine didn't know yet was that I had one final piece of evidence that would forever change her inheritance and our relationship, a provision in my will that would make her truly understand the cost of calling me a burden after 40 years of support. The document James was about to present would redefine our relationship more dramatically than she could possibly imagine. Dr. Williams opened a file. "As Mrs. Sullivan's geriatric care specialist, I've documented her actual condition. She has normal age-related changes, but remains fully competent to manage her affairs." "You've been pretending," Elaine's voice rose. "Do you know how much stress you've caused us? The worry." "The financial planning," I suggested. "The calls to realtors." James Calloway opened a thick folder. "We've documented every attempt to redirect Mrs. Sullivan's mail, access her accounts, and isolate her from friends and support systems. These actions constitute elder abuse under state law." "That's ridiculous. I was trying to help her." Elaine stood up, grabbing her designer purse, purchased with money I'd given her for Tyler's summer camp. I remembered suddenly. "Mrs. Davidson," Harrison addressed her by her married name, "please sit down. There's more." I nodded to James, who removed a document from his briefcase. "This is Eleanor's updated will, completed and notarized last year when she was demonstrably of sound mind." "Fine," Elaine snapped. "I don't care about her will." "You should," I said quietly, "because it contains a complete accounting of every dollar your father and I provided to you since Ton 72, $287,000, adjusted for inflation." Her eyes widened. "That was support, not loans." "Indeed," James agreed. "However, Eleanor has chosen to balance her estate. This amount will be deducted from your inheritance and distributed to charitable organizations supporting elderly victims of financial exploitation." "You can't do that," Elaine's voice rose. "I've already done it," I replied calmly. "The money is placed in an irrevocable trust. The house will be sold upon my death, and after the adjustment for your previous support, the remaining proceeds will establish a foundation in your father's name, the Robert Sullivan Elder Justice Fund." The silence in the room was absolute. "Unless," I continued, "you sign this agreement today." I nodded to Harrison, who slid a document across the desk. "It stipulates that you will cease all attempts to control my assets, schedule regular family visits without financial discussions, and attend monthly counselling sessions with me to repair our relationship. And if I refuse," her voice was cold, "then I'll file formal charges of attempted elder abuse and financial exploitation," James stated matter-of-factly. "The evidence is substantial." Elaine stared at me, this woman she'd dismissed as failing and burdensome, now revealed as methodical and strategic. "What would you have done if someone tried to erase your contributions after decades of support? Would you have confronted them immediately or created a strategic plan like Eleanor? Have you experienced similar dismissive treatment from family members who should know better? Our community values your wisdom in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and sharing them helps others recognize warning signs in their own relationships. Tap the like button if you believe it's never too late to stand up for your dignity, no matter your age. Remember, financial exploitation of elders often begins with subtle dismissals and helpful interventions. Recognize the warning signs: unexplained changes to financial arrangements, isolation from friends and support systems, decisions made without your input, and your concerns being attributed to cognitive decline. Knowledge is protection, and awareness is the first line of defense. 6 months later, Margaret, the Jenkins couple, and Patricia joined me for coffee on my wraparound porch. The autumn leaves were turning the same vibrant red as the year before, but everything else had changed. "How was the counselling session yesterday?" Patricia asked, stirring honey into her tea. "Productive," I replied. "Dr. Garner says we're making progress." Elaine admitted she's been anxious about her own retirement planning. Seeing me aging triggered her fears about security. "That's no excuse," Margaret huffed, loyal as always. "No, but it's an explanation," I said. "Understanding doesn't mean accepting the behaviour." The agreement Elaine had signed required monthly counselling sessions, which had been awkward at first, but gradually revealed layers of fear beneath her actions. Her company had cut retirement benefits, Marcus's business was struggling, and college costs for her children had depleted their savings. The house, my house, had represented a solution to financial anxiety she couldn't face directly. Understanding this hadn't erased the betrayal, but it had begun a careful reconstruction of trust. The most significant change came in how she spoke to me. No more dismissive tones or interrupted explanations. Being exposed as competent had earned back a respect I hadn't realized was missing. My documentation system remained in place, though the recorder stayed in my desk drawer. James Calloway had helped me establish a transparent financial management system with appropriate checks and balances. I maintained my independence while creating accountability that protected everyone. The revised will remained unchanged. The accounting of financial support would still redirect a significant portion of Elaine's inheritance to the foundation unless our relationship metrics, as documented by our counsellor, showed substantial improvement for at least 2 years. My home remained mine. With some practical modifications I chose myself. I had a medical alert system installed, not because Elaine insisted, but because it made practical sense living alone at my age. The garden now featured raised beds that were easier on my back and knees, a design I researched and implemented with help from the Jenkins. Most importantly, I'd started a community garden initiative at the senior centre, funded by a small grant I'd written with skills from decades of nursing administration. Elaine had surprisingly offered to help with the business plan, putting her Cornell degree to use in service rather than exploitation. Breaking ground in spring, I confirmed to my friends. Raised beds for accessibility. The community centre is providing transportation for those who can't drive. Looking back, I realised that strength sometimes looked like vulnerability, that justice could make space for redemption, and that even after 40 years of giving, I had the right to protect what was mine. For those of you facing similar situations, remember this: documentation is protection. A dismissive comment today can become manipulation tomorrow. Trust your instincts. That unease you feel isn't paranoia, it's experience. The modern term is gaslighting, making you question your own perceptions, but our generation simply called it being taken advantage of, and we've always known how to fight back. Most importantly, understand that advocating for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Your dignity isn't negotiable, regardless of your age or health. As Robert always said, standing your ground doesn't mean standing alone. Reach out to professionals who understand elder rights. Our generation has earned its respect, and sometimes we must demand it. Maintain your connections outside your immediate family. The isolation Elaine created, intercepting calls, discouraging visits, was strategic. A support network of peers provides both emotional validation and witnesses to changing behaviour patterns. Keep copies of important documents in multiple locations. Give trusted friends access to your true wishes. Establish relationships with professionals your family members don't control. A lawyer or doctor chosen by someone trying to establish your incompetence has an inherent conflict of interest. Later that evening, as I reviewed my financial records, a habit I would never abandon, I added a note to the trust document. If Elaine maintained her progress, a graduated restoration clause would return portions of the redirected inheritance over time. Justice without the possibility of redemption wasn't justice at all, I decided. Robert would have agreed. His naval service had taught him that discipline required both consequences and pathway back to good standing. I hadn't shared this modification with Elaine yet. Her changed behaviour needed to come from genuine remorse, not financial calculation. True reconciliation couldn't be purchased. It had to be earned through consistent respect and rebuilt trust. The most powerful lesson I learned through this experience was that age doesn't diminish our right to autonomy. The wisdom we've accumulated isn't obsolete, it's essential. And the careful habits our children sometimes mock as old-fashioned may be our most effective protection against exploitation. The phone rang. Elaine calling at our newly established weekly check-in time. "Hi, Mum." Her voice carried a warmth absent for years. "I found that article about container gardening you mentioned. I thought maybe we could try those raised planter boxes on your porch next spring. Easier on your back." "I'd like that," I replied, making notes in my journal, no longer documenting betrayal but recording rebuilding instead. "Zinnias, I think. Your father always said they had the most honest faces of any flower." After we hung up, I sat at Robert's desk, running my fingers over the worn wood. The drawer still contained my recorder, the will with its shocking provision, and 40 years of meticulous records, tools of both protection and, potentially, reconciliation. These stories of vindication happen every day in the lives of women just like you. Women who sacrificed everything only to find themselves called a burden when they needed support themselves. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and share it with another woman who might need to be reminded of her worth today. Subscribe to Her Silver Truth for more powerful stories of women reclaiming their dignity after decades of sacrifice. What would you have done in Eleanor's situation? Would you have confronted your daughter immediately or chosen the strategic path of documentation? Would you have offered reconciliation or pursued justice without compromise? Share your wisdom in the comments below. Our generation's wisdom deserves to be honoured, not exploited. We didn't survive decades of challenges to be dismissed in our golden years. These stories matter because you matter. Be sure to check out the next video on screen for another journey of transformation. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.